Greetings, Lumen students. It's week 12. This is your Thursday video, and I apologize for all the black, but we're in mourning. Here there's been a death, and we are deeply saddened by the death of one of our medieval characters that I would like to tell you about now. This is Maag, the Verlaine's daughter. And Verlaine during this time period was a peasant who was not free. He could be bought and sold like a slave. His house, his family, and his labor all belonged to the lord of the manor. So Verlaines were bound by law to grind their grain at the lord's mill. The lord was entitled to a share of their grain or a small sum of money for the grinding. And there was a custom that was called Harriet, when a Verlaine died, the Lord had the right to his most valuable animal or piece of livestock. So Maag, the Verlaine's daughter, is her father has just died, and we are mourning his loss. But I want you to pay attention to if he should have been mourned, if they really did mourn, though maybe they pretended to mourn. And consider what his life was like. So far we've learned about the life of the Lord, the life of a pilgrim, the life of a knight and a knight's son. How about a peasant? What was their life like in the Middle Ages? My father died last winter. Also, the chickens. They choked themselves. They thrashed and turned sick. After all the trouble I had plucking their grass and cleaning their muck, and not one egg. Oh, I'm sorry. What was I saying? My father died, laid down with a fever. At first I was glad. May God forgive me. He can't lift his hand against me. I thought, while he's sick in the straw, he can't hit me, not me, nor mother, nor wee Jack. But then he grew worse. Maag, says mother, you'll have to take the grain to the mill. I took that great sack, but the mill wasn't turning. The kingpin was broken, and I had to wait 8 hours, knee-deep in slush, to grind my meal and give the Lord his share. That's the law. You have to grind at the Lord's mill, unless it's broken, day and night. I waited, cursing under my breath, till they fixed it. They ground my corn, and they took their cut. I trot home with my shoes soaked and my teeth chattering, and by the time I got home, my father was dead. I prayed for him. He wasn't a good man, always drunk. Mother could only see from one eye, and he beat Jack, and now the lad is a half-wit. But he was strong, and he was canny with his pennies, and somehow he saved up enough for a cow. Our cow. We call her Paradise. She's a good red brindle. She's not 6 years old and strong enough to plow. She's sweet-breathed, she's sweet-tempered, and she's bonny. Jack and I slept with her all last winter. The cow's body was warm, and her dung patched our roof. We'll have a calf in the spring and milk for the market. Then mother tells me, the Lord has his rights. Harriet, they call it, when a man dies, the Lord has the right to the best beast he had. It's his right, she said. But I paid her no heed. Forsooth, I could have killed father for dying. The Lord came early. A dapple gray horse, a ring on his finger. He pinches his nose when he enters our hut. Peers at our livestock, fishy-eyed. I didn't say a word. I was staring at the cow in the straw. It wasn't our cow. It was Tam Bywater's cow. Their mangy cow with its ribs showing, breathing like the bellows. A beast not worth the price of its hide. Mother is scraping and fawning. If you please, sir, begging your lordship's pardon. There's mother so meek and blind in one eye, making her hair falling out, her dress full of holes, making a fool of his lordship. So, instead of the cow, He took the best of the pigs. I'd have chosen the same in his place. We curtsied. Mother kissed his hand, and we watched him ride off. Then we waited till dark to take back paradise. Do you like how they tricked the Lord of the Manor, students? What do you think about the life of a peasant during this time period? Oh, horrible. Don't you think? Doesn't that sound kind of miserable? Well, I have, under my black shroud of darkness, for mourning, Maud wasn't really too sad that her father died. He had provided for them, I guess, a little bit, but he'd hit them a lot. Her mother so much she was blind in one eye, and hit her brother that he made him kind of a little bit slow in his brain. So we don't need to mourn anymore. But we can still mourn for the sadness of Mog's life. These sentences, students, include your spelling words that I want to review for this week. So number 1 and 2 contain the same homophone with 3 different spellings. Okay. And number 3, 4, and 5, these 3 blanks also contain the same, actually they're homophones, with the 3 different spellings. So see if you can identify what word goes in each and how you would spell them, just really quick. Number 1, in the days of blank, peasants had a hard life. Number 2, blank lucky that blank house is not like Mog's. Any ideas what would fit in that blank? In each of those blanks with different spellings of each. Think about this one for a minute. That might be the easiest one to decipher. And I'm looking at you. What word would go there? Your house. You're lucky. Oh, I just gave you the other clue too, didn't I? I'll use this one. Oh, that's all right. You're lucky. So that your is spelled Y-O-U-R. Possessive, right? The house that belongs to you. And this type of your is you are. You are lucky. How do you spell that one? Good. Did you get that one right? You're lucky. So what is the third kind of your? Remember how to spell that one for the past? In the days of yore. Your. Okay. Let's see if we can look at this one. Number 3. Each of these 3 blanks have the same sounding word with different spellings. Even though the son's blank showed down on the peasants just like everyone else, it didn't matter. Number 4, the Lord could blank their possessions anytime he wanted. And number 5, there was nothing peasants could do to blank their standard of living. So this is going to be the easiest one. How do you spell this type of ray? Even though the sun's rays, R-A-Y-S. Did you get that one right? Shown down on everyone else, it didn't matter. They were not equal at that time. The Lord could, how do you spell that kind of rays? Meaning to destroy, to annihilate, to take, to beat down, raise. And then finally, there was nothing peasants could do to raise, meaning to lift up their standard of living. How do you spell that kind of raise? R-A-I-S-E. Ah! Sorry about that, but you know how to spell it, I think. Okay, I have a fun language arts activity before we get into our finishing up of the 7 Wonders of Sassafras Springs. And I have put together some sentences with some dependent clauses related to the 6 wonders that Even has found so far. And I had to throw in the pretend wonder. I had to throw in the outhouse also, just because it was so funny. One of the enrichment activities that you can play this time is called Mix and Match Dice. And so you can do something similar like this yourself, students, where you write a clause and an independent clause and a dependent clause, and then put them together in a crazy way. So I'm going to pull one from this column. I've got 2 different piles, and I've mixed them all up. So the loom spelled out the name of a guilty boy. Okay, that's the first one. Okay. And that sentence could stand on its own, couldn't it? So it's independent. And then I'm going to choose my dependent clause, and we're going to see how silly they sound together. Because the crops were about to be destroyed. So this sentence is called a dependent clause because it begins with the because that could not stand on its own, right? It is dependent. So because you couldn't just say because the crops couldn't stand on their own, you need something else, right? So it's got to go either at the beginning or at the end of another sentence. The loom spelled out the name of the guilty boy because the crops were about to be destroyed. Ha 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 ha. That makes no sense, but it's kind of funny. Here's my next one. The ghostly table walked in the graveyard. Why? We don't know. Because the shriveled applehead was thirsty. The shriveled applehead doll was thirsty. Okay. So you can see we're mixing and matching our stories here with our dependent clauses. Okay. Our next one. The girl, the evil ship in a bottle washed up the beach. The evil ship in the bottle washed up the beach. Why? We don't know. Because, here's our dependent clause, because the tornado picked it up. No. No, not quite. Okay. I guess that actually could make sense, even though it doesn't make sense in our story. The bookshelf kept the rainmaker from drowning. Why? Because Buddy played a cruel prank. And we can put these dependent clauses at the beginning, students. You remember, we talked about this the first day. So if I put this dependent clause first, I would need to add a comma, okay, at the end before I put the second half. Because Buddy played a cruel prank, the bookshelf kept the rainmaker from drowning. Oh, I forgot my N on drowning. Sorry. Drowning. The outhouse sailed around the world. Why? We'll see. Because the captain drank through the storm. We'll put that one first too. Because the captain drank through the storm, comma, the outhouse sailed around the world. That makes absolutely no sense. And Santa Claus waved to him. Okay, last one. The musical saw scared away the grasshoppers. Why? Because the town refused to pay any money. Here's our comma. Here's our independent clause. Okay, I've got one more, but I can't find the other half to it. What did happen to the other half to it? Because the widowed husband was lonely at dinner. Then what happened next? I don't know. I can't find my other one. You finish the second half of that, students. So you can see, you can mix and match independent and dependent clauses. Remember, it's a dependent clause if it could not stand on its own, okay? Because the town refused to pay any money. What does that mean? You can't just say that, right? So you've got to add something more to it. It's dependent on another part of the sentence, or this one. Because the widowed husband was lonely at dinner, he got married again. You know, you've got to finish it somehow. You can't just leave it hanging there. So, good luck. You can try this mix and match poetry game yourself, students, if you want to. It's really fun to think of different clauses and put them together. You can make them really silly. They don't need to tie into our book at all. Just come up with your own funny ones and practice mixing and matching them and putting them together. And then let's go ahead, and that's your action items. You're also working on your little students, you're working on getting started on your history research and on your story jumper picture book, or on any picture book just that you draw yourself. You're going to tell us a story from the perspective either of a knight competing in the tournament or with his code of chivalry. You're going to do a crusade, really the children on the children's crusade. You're going to tell us a story from the perspective of a peasant and the Black Plague, or from a monk or a saint and their martyrdom or their relics, or a pilgrim going to see the site of a martyrdom or a relic. Okay, so have fun with that experience. Little students, that will be due until after the holidays, so you have some time to work on that. And let's finish up the 7 wonders of Sassafras Springs. Remember, he needs to go see Uncle Alf, Lulu's son. Jeb and Coogie were waiting for me down on Yellow Dog Road. "We thought you'd be locked up," said Coogie. "We vowed we would break you out of jail one way or another," Jeb added. "It wasn't what you think. While you two were filling up a watermelon, I got myself the 6th wonder." I enjoyed seeing the surprised look on their faces. They wanted to hear all about it, but I had no time to talk. "I've got to get home to dinner." "Can it wait?" asked Coogie. "No, sir. If I don't get something in my stomach soon, I'll fade away to nothing. I'll tell you the whole story when we're chopping wood for the mayor." I left them in the middle of the road looking confused. As Sal and I trotted home, I do believe that dog was at least as hungry as I was. No one mentioned wonders during dinner, though Pa did marvel when I put away my 3rd helping of dumplings. After the dishes were washed and put away, Pa and I sat on the porch in silence, until Aunt Pretty bustled out to join us. Her arms were full of clothes. "Here's your traveling outfit, Eben," she said with pride, "just like brand new. Now stand up and let's see if these things will fit." There was a first-rate shirt, a pair of trousers that looked brand new, knitted socks, and store-bought suspenders that must have been bought out of Aunt Pretty's pin money. The clothes fit fine, and Aunt Pretty even said I looked handsome. "It's the 7th day, you know," I said. "I happened to look at the calendar today," said Pa. "I've got one more wonder to find, and I think I can do it." I took a deep breath. "If you could see clear to giving me one more day." I waited for a big reaction, but Pa just leaned back and closed his eyes. "Makes sense to me," said Aunt Pretty, folding up my new duds. "The Lord may have created the earth in 6 days with one to spare, but he didn't have to help his Pa in the fields." Pa cleared his throat. I knew that meant he had something more important on his mind. "Eben, I've always been honest with you, or tried to be, and that's why I've got to show you this letter that came from Cousin Molly today." He reached into his shirt pocket, pulled out a letter, and held it out for me to take. I guess I didn't want to know what was in that letter because my hand wouldn't take it. Pa paused to tell me he'd written to Molly to ask if I could stay with them. Then he carefully unfolded the letter and read it out loud. "Dear Cousin Cole, thank you for the letter. Although we'd love to have Eben visit, this is not a good time, as the whole town of Silver Peak is down with influenza. Many have died. Eli almost met his maker but pulled through, for which I am grateful. Maybe next year your boy can come see us. And hello to your sister. Sincerely, Molly Campbell." "I told you that place was not fit for humans," Aunt Pretty remarked, plopping down into her rocker. "Influenza." "Now, Pretty, this is a big disappointment to the boy," Pa told her. My heart crashed down to my toes and my eyes got blurry. "Disappointment, I'd say. I fretted away the better part of a week, and now that dream of a mountain had just crumbled to dust. I guess it doesn't matter about the 7th wonder, because I can't make good on my promise." Pa sounded as disappointed as I felt. Aunt Pretty patted my arm. "Next year we'll be here soon enough, and then you can go." Surprisingly, she chuckled. "Say, you certainly got folks worked up about wonders. I haven't seen so much excitement around here for years. Since that carnival came, I think." My voice came back. Maybe they weren't wonders after all. I hadn't figured out how an apple head doll measured up to a pyramid, or how a musical saw stacked up to the Hanging Gardens of Babylon. "Why not let us be the judge of that?" said Pa. So I took out my tablet and read them all my stories, adding a few details here and there, as I described all that I'd heard and seen. Pa and Aunt Pretty and even Sal listened in silence, except for an occasional, "My word! I never heard that," from my aunt, who stopped crocheting entirely by the 3rd wonder. When I finished, Pa said, "Those were rip-roaring stories, all right. Say, I met Dutch Hubble once. He looked like he'd seen a ghost. His hair stood straight up all the time." "And I'd forgotten what a bad boy Buddy Peavy was," my aunt added. I sat there thinking about the wonders as the evening shadow settled over the barnyard. A doll, a bookcase, a saw, a table, a ship in a bottle, a woven cloth. They were all as unimpressive and ordinary as Sassafras Springs, yet each in its own way was a one-of-a-kind marvel. After the light was gone, Aunt Pretty stood up and gave me a strange look, then abruptly went inside the house without a word. A little while later, she came back toting a lantern and a big shoebox. "Now, I know these are no wonders. In fact, they're about as ordinary as can be. But if Mrs. Pritchard can show off some dried-up apple doll, and Violet Rowan can brag about a worn-out table, you might as well see these." She took the lid off and turned the box on its side. Out tumbled a whole world of little people, all dressed up and painted and made of clothespins. Some had painted faces on the round tops, and they were dressed in overalls or suits or dresses, even a preacher's outfit. "What are they?" I asked. "These are my clothespin people. When I was a girl, my very best friend and I used to make them. That Callie, she had a sense of humor." Aunt Pretty held up a doll that had a grizzled fur beard and stuffing around the middle. "Isn't this the spitting image of old Ev Olson?" she asked Pa. He nodded and chuckled. She held up another one dressed in leather. "I made this Indian, and Callie did the preacher." She displayed another figure with a flowered dress and a gigantic hat. "Callie and I like to split our sides laughing at this hat Leslie wore to the church social." "Aunt Pretty, these are wonderful. Look, there's a pilgrim and a Santa Claus." We had a lot of fun, but we stopped when we were grown up. Once Callie moved away, I went back to making them, just so as I'd never forget. Every wash day while I'm hanging clothes, one clothespin seems to suddenly look just like somebody I know. And there I go again. Of course, they are no wonders of the world, but they help me remember Callie. I sure hoped she wasn't going to start crying. Instead, she reached into her pocket and pulled out another clothespin person. It was a boy, wearing a tiny shirt, trousers, and suspenders that exactly matched the outfit my aunt just made me. "It's me, Aunt Pretty. Doesn't that beat all? I thought it might bring you luck on your trip." Without another word, my aunt whisked her entire clothespin population back into the box and went into the house. "That Pretty, she's the one who's a wonder," Pa said admiringly, and I had no trouble agreeing with that. When Pa finally rose to go into the house, I had a question for him. "Think I can have an hour off tomorrow if I start an hour early?" "Have to get your own breakfast. Have to coax Mabel and Myrn into giving up some milk an hour early," said Pa. "I'll do it. The cows might be cranky, but they were never in that good of a mood anyway." "Are you going to look for a seventh wonder?" he asked. "Yes, sir, I believe I will. You'd think after a week of searching for wonders, Sal would be getting a mite bored, but she didn't mind a bit as we made our way down the windy, rocky trail that led to Alf D's mule farm. I found it slow going, though. You'd have to be a mule or mule-headed to make it, but we did. Strangely enough, Uncle Alf was standing on his tidy white porch when I got there, like he'd been waiting for me. "Hurry on in here now, son," he called to me as I hurried up his garden path. I speeded up as Sal dashed ahead, squeezing through the screen door before me. "It's about time you got here," Uncle Alf greeted me. "You were expecting me? Word gets around Sassafras Springs. I know you need a seventh wonder, and I might have one for you. Only you can be the judge of that," Uncle Alf answered. "Dog, you lay down there." He pointed to a rug by the front door. Sal did just what he said. Everybody listened to Uncle Alf. He was nobody's uncle that anybody knew of, but folks respected him. Alfred D. stood as straight as a fence post, and he wore the Sassafras Springs uniform. Well, a rough blue shirt and worn overalls with a red bandana sticking out of the back pocket. He was stick-thin, with cheekbones like Rocky Mountain peaks that rose above a droopy brown mustache. Folks had been calling him Uncle Alf for years, even though he was barely older than Pa. He'd been married once, but his wife died young, before they had a chance to have a family. That's when he became Uncle Alf to everyone's children. Inside his house was neat and clean. The only unusual thing that was what was sitting on the dining room table. And believe me, it wasn't dinner. The sight of it purely took my breath away because spread out before me was all of Sassafras Springs, every inch of it, in miniature. It's Sassafras Springs," I explained. "How'd you do it?" "I carved it all with my own 2 hands. It's only taken most of my life so far, and it's not finished yet, not by a long shot." I bent down for a closer look. It was all there, all carved and nailed, all glued and painted, all the houses and farms, with Yellow Dog Road pointing the way through the middle of town and out again. I saw our house, small and white and neat, and its big white porch with the floor painted dark green. A miniature Aunt Pretty sat in her chair, holding a toothpick-sized crochet hook. A tiny Pa sat on the steps with a boy, reading a thick book. "That's my 7 Wonders book," I burst out. "That scene had taken place only a few nights ago." "You don't say," murmured Uncle Alf. I followed the whole layout up Yellow Dog Road to the ridge and the Pritchard cottage. Mrs. Pritchard, dead on perfect to the flowers blooming on her dress, was hanging laundry. Further up the road, Cully Pone's shack had a familiar slant to its roof, and a 3-inch Cully stood poised over an old stump, ready to lower the blade of his axe. The church was surrounded by trees and tombstones. Through colored cellophane panels on the church windows, I could see Calvin Smiley holding a bow over his musical saw. This all just happened! I could hardly breathe. Yulie and Violet Rowan tended their garden. Ray Ellen stood outside our barn, holding a burlap sack that glowed eerily. I pulled back. The rest of Sassafras Springs was just as real. Leslie Mull in her yellow sunbonnet. Grandma Mayer had put up a jar of pickles. Mayor Peavy hoed potatoes, while the First Lady slopped toy hogs. Lily Saylor stood on her porch, clutching a red satin box close to her heart. "How did you see it? You weren't there. How do you know what happened?" I asked. Uncle Alf shrugged his bony shoulders. "I can't rightly say, Eben. When I get to carving, I just start seeing how things are, that's all. I guess my Grandma Emma was the same way with that loom of hers. I can tell you about the carving if you want to hear it." I wanted to hear it. I knew when I was face to face with a genuine wonder. And even if it wasn't, I still wanted to know the secret of Uncle Alf's carvings. Uncle Alf's story. When I was your age, I wanted to carve wood, but I didn't know how. Most men whittled toys and whistles, but nobody I knew could carve a real figure. I had me a knife that I kept real sharp, and in my spare time I'd practice. Nothing ever seemed to come out quite right. One day a traveling artist came through Sassafras Springs. His name was LaFlame, and from the way he talked, he was a genuine Frenchman. He'd paint your portrait for $5. Everybody wanted one, but only a few could afford it. One family had him paint a colored copy of a photo of their little girl who had died. He made her look like an angel. The town board got together $5 to paint the picture of the mayor. Hobart was his name. Everybody was kind of puzzled because he came out looking more like a devil, and it turned out he was. He ran off with some funds, I recall. Anyway, the church hired LaFlame to paint some angels on the ceiling. He had angels flying all over that place, beautiful ones. They've been painted over since then. Seems some committee decided they were too fancy for an ordinary country church. One night he stopped by to see if my mom would buy a pitcher. She didn't have $5, but she gave him a glass of cool water. He was resting on the porch when he saw me with the knife and the wood, and he asked what I was trying to do with it. When I told him, LaFlame laughed at me and said I was going about it all wrong. He said you can't just start in carving. You've got to get to know the wood and let it get to know you. You've got to hold the wood, warm it, feel the beat of its pulse. He took the wood and rolled it around in his hands like he was kneading bread dough. After a while, he took my knife and showed me how to make deep cuts, not just hack away at it. I watched him real careful-like for a while. All of a sudden, he stood up and handed the wood to me. "You're ready for it now," he told me. And with that, LaFlame walked off the porch and right out of Sassafras Springs forever. I kept on carving anyway, without knowing what I was doing. And when I finished, I laughed out loud because I'd carved myself an angel without even knowing it. All because that angel artist had worked the wood for me. Pretty angel it was, but I never carved another angel again. Some years later, I was at a dance, and I met a pretty gal from Blue River. I felt for certain I'd seen her before. When I got home, I rushed upstairs, and I got that wooden angel out of a drawer, and there she was. The face was the spitting image of that gal, almost like a photograph. Of course, I married her, and I've been carving ever since. Now I won't try to explain what I just said because I don't understand it. I don't have to understand it. I just have to do the carving. The wood does the rest. It was far-fetched. It was far-fetched, but looking at that miniature version of my hometown, I'd have believed anything. A worry was growing somewhere in my head as I studied the layout again. Sassafras Springs was there in every up-to-the-moment detail. But there were odd things, too. A woman with a dog and a lantern approached a man sitting at a table in the graveyard. A cottony cloud of locusts hovered over a farm where a tiny family raised brooms in the fields. On the far edge was an outcropping of rocks high above a creek where a man in a top hat tended a fire. And out in a shed behind a farmhouse, an old woman sat before a loom. "You've got the past and the present all mixed up," I told Uncle Alf. "The older you get, the more the past and the present are all mixed up in your brain," Uncle Alf patiently explained. "Future, too, I guess." I pointed to the end of Yellow Dog Road where I noticed a funny figure, kind of like me, though older somehow. He was on the edge of Sassafras Springs walking away from town. He had a small suitcase in one hand and a scruffy old dog following him. "Who's that?" "Who does it look like?" "It's me." I could barely whisper what I was thinking. "Looks like I'm leaving." "Is that it?" "Kind of looks that way to me, too." I swallowed hard. I said often enough that I'd get out of Sassafras Springs someday. Seeing myself walking down that road with no one stopping me made me feel kind of funny inside. Glad, but sad, and kind of lonely. I remember what Aunt Pretty said. "I hope the farm doesn't go to rack and ruin," I repeated. "Not likely, and it doesn't mean you'll never come back," Uncle Alf said softly. "Seems as if you're off to see the world. Of course, up to now I had my doubts." "What do you mean? Even? There are two kinds of folks. those who are satisfied right where they are, and those with an itch to see the rest of the world. If you're the kind who's got to go, then get going. Even if you don't, now that you've found 7 wonders, I bet you'll be noticing new ones every day. Uncle Alf held out his fist and opened his fingers to reveal an unfinished carving of a baby. Who's that? I asked. I don't know yet. Don't know whether it's a boy or a girl. Well, I'll know in due time, Uncle Alf said. I looked down at that tiny Sassafras Springs and I thought about Junior's egg and Leslie Mole's log cabin quilt, Mrs. Sailor's jade bracelet and Aunt Pretty's green glass beads, Yulie Rowan's worn table and Calvin Smiley's ordinary saw. I was only looking for big things, I told him, but a small thing can be a prize and a wonder too. You have something there, boy. I straightened up and pulled out my tablet. Well, I found the 7th wonder. Maybe not of the whole world, but it's the 7th wonder of Sassafras Springs for sure. Could be, answered Uncle Alf. And even? Uncle Alf glanced down at that tiny baby-to-be in his hand. Please say hello to your Aunt Pretty for me. I would be pleased if she stopped by someday. Yes, sir. Something else was bothering me. Uncle Alf, do you still have your grandma's loom? Not exactly, Eben. Uncle Alf spoke softly. After Grandma died, that loom sat silent in the shed until one day a big wind came along and smashed the shed and the loom into a pile of sticks. I stacked it all up, and I've been carving on it for years. Most of the carvings you see here came out of that loom. I think Grandma would have liked it that way. Old Emma definitely would have liked it, I decided as I walked home, full of questions and confusions and, well, full of wonder. Day 9, change of plans. We are going to pick up, we got through the 7 wonders, but I am going to wait until later to read day 9 and change of plans, and we'll finish up this story together, students. So thank you so much for listening, and good luck as you complete your action items, and I'll catch you later. Thank you so much.